And the way that we designed the space, we were really thinking about this idea of haint blue, which is a color that many Gullah Geechee folks will paint the roofs of their porch or other architecture on the facade of their homes. The idea being that this is a color that negative spirits really don't want anything to do with, that they'll confuse it with the sea or the sky and therefore leave the inhabitants of the home alone. So we really wanted to bring protection to this space and to these subjects and to these scenes. So we surrounded ourselves with our version of haint blue. My name is Kelly Long. I'm a senior curatorial assistant here at the Whitney Museum, and we are standing on the 7th floor in the permanent collection galleries in Jeanne Moutoussamy-Ashe's collection show called Jeanne Moutoussamy-Ashe and the Last Gullah Islands. So this is an exhibition of 13 black and white photographs from Jeanne Moutoussamy-Ashe's series of pictures that she made between 1977 and 1982, primarily in Daufuskie Island, but also in other neighboring South Carolina and Georgia sea islands. In 1974, Jeanne was doing an independent study in West Africa while she was a junior in college. And during that visit, she spent time at the Cape Coast Castle on the coast of Ghana, and she really had this sort of embodied experience of looking out the porthole from that castle across the Atlantic Ocean and thinking about how the fishing villages that were in and amongst the area where she was staying looked so very much like the fishing villages that were on the other side of the ocean on the sea islands that were off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, and the connective tissue between these two places and the terrible journey that many folks would have been forced to make as they were being moved across the ocean as part of the transatlantic slave trade. Jeanne, after 1974, when she had this trip to West Africa, couldn't get out of her mind this moment that she had of thinking about the space between these two places, and she knew she wanted to make her way to the sea islands. So eventually Jeanne made her way to Daufuskie Island around 1977 or 1978, and that was sort of where this project gained momentum, and she started to develop relationships with the people who still lived there and to make photographs, portraits of both people and place. The Gullah Geechee are the descendants of the formerly enslaved people who were brought over primarily from West Africa during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Because Daufuskie Island was then and is now the only South Carolina sea island unconnected to the mainland by a bridge, Gullah Geechee culture and language and foodways have really been able to hold on a little bit more firmly there, even as real estate development and pollution and hard times economically have pushed folks back to the mainland to find work and to build their lives there. There have been these wonderful remnants of Gullah Geechee culture that have continued to thrive on Daufuskie Island. At the beginning of the 1900s, there were thousands of Gullah Geechee folks who lived on the island, who worked on the island. By the time Jeanne arrived in 1977, there were just around 80 of those folks left, and now the number is much smaller. So it was important to Jeanne at that moment when things were changing so rapidly on the island to help make a document of this moment and these people's lives as they were. And the way we sort of talked about designing this exhibition and putting the pictures together in space was looking at Jeanne's book, Daufuskie Island, which she published in 1982 after she had sort of ended this chapter of her time on the island. And for that book, she divided the pictures into 4 categories: people, place, spiritual grace, and everyday life. And that's how we decided to select these 4 images to welcome folks into the show. So you have a picture of a wedding party here. Blossom Robinson, an individual here, people. This is a picture of the water, so we get to see sort of the importance of the waterways around the sea islands, place. And everyday life, which this is a picture of a home with clothes on the line. You can see that people live here and it's sort of weathered and worn and well-loved. One person whose trust Jeanne really wanted to earn during her time on the island was Lavinia Blossom Robinson. And I love that she has this sort of warm smile on her face and the glint of mischief in her eye. And Jeanne really talks about Blossom as giving her a hard time while she was making photographs, teasing her a little bit. But I think she also really enjoyed the process of being seen by an artist in this way. Blossom also appears in the wedding day photograph of the bride and the groom and their guests and their wedding party in front of the iconic Union Baptist Church on Daufuskie Island. Blossom's here sort of at the periphery of the group, standing off to the side, not looking at the camera. And I sort of imagine that she's a little bit impatient for Jeanne to take the picture, but also sort of watchful at the edge of this group, protecting her community. I also love that we get a sense of the bride and groom as being sort of bashful about being the center of attention on their own day. They're not at the center of the picture, but sort of off to the side. So this is one of my favorite photographs in the exhibition. It reminds me of my sister. And in this picture, we get a bride who's standing outside with her shoes in her hands. She's wearing slippers, which you can see if you look closely. And her sister, the maid of honor, who sort of seems a little bit less shy than she is and is having this wonderful sort of full toothy laugh in the foreground. And it makes me smile every time I see it. And I really love that we get pictures of this, of sort of special occasions and marking rites of passage in someone's life. And we get to see them next to photographs like this, which is a scene of everyday life where we see men and boys in the foreground boiling crab to eat their dinner. If you look closely back toward the house that's in the background, you can see women who are sort of sitting on a bench, maybe preparing vegetables for the meal. And this is just sort of a quiet, everyday moment of folks preparing to sit and eat together. This photograph is really special because it's one of the few in the exhibition that wasn't made on Daufuskie Island, and it's one of the first photographs that Jeanne actually made when she started making trips to this area called the Low Country. This is actually a photograph of Edisto Island, which is a neighboring sea island. And Jeanne was attending this high school graduation and saw this sort of moment of gravity and the sort of seriousness of these young people who are sort of stepping into a new chapter of their lives. And this young man who's in the foreground carrying the American flag. And it felt like a moment that she really wanted to capture on film. This is a photograph of Susie Smith, who is the woman that Jeanne would typically stay with while she was making photographs on Daufuskie Island. There were very few cars on the island. Most people got around just on foot or by bicycle. And Daufuskie Island is sort of unique among the sea islands because it's the only one that was then and is now unconnected to the mainland by a bridge. So you can't get there by car. You have to take a boat. So when Jeanne arrived, she, would ride around in this car. There probably weren't many on the island, and this incredible moment of the light coming through the window of this back seat while Susie's riding there, and the plastic sheeting that's sort of bending towards her in the wind, and this really sort of contemplative moment that she's having, and we don't know what she's thinking or where her thoughts are, but the light on her face is really beautiful. I think that Jeanne's pictures inside of domestic spaces and inside of people's homes are some of her most tender. She really had to develop trust with the people that she was meeting on the island before they would invite her into their homes to, have a glass of iced tea, to sit down and to talk about their lives. Photographs like this are really special because if you look closely, you can see things that are in probably your kitchen and that you would very much recognize. This is a super well-loved utilitarian space with really personal touches that make this house a home. And I think Jeanne's really thinking about protecting the intimacy of scenes like this and the subjects that she's picturing in this exhibition. I love this photograph of a little girl. She's sort of standing inside of her home looking out at we don't know what through a screen door, and the texture of the screen door through which we're seeing her is so strange and beautiful that you sort of don't know quite what you're looking at until you get up close to it. It almost reads as pixelated, or like it might not be a photograph but a drawing or something with a little bit more texture to it. I also really love the seriousness with which Jeanne treats this young subject. Really the same as the seriousness with which she treats elders in the community, and I think there's a real tenderness to the way that she's regarding people of any age. There are Gullah Geechee words that sort of differentiate between people who live on the island and have lived there all their lives and newcomers, Fobinyas or Fokamyas. Jeanne considers herself very much a Fokamya, so someone who's new to the island and to learning about Gullah cultural traditions and ways of life. Jeannie's an artist who cares very deeply about legacy, and you can really see that if you look into her broader practice and the kind of books that she's made over the years, the kind of other bodies of works that she's produced. Very notably, she authored a book in 1986 called Viewfinders, Black Women Photographers, which was really the first of its kind. She's really compiling their work and their names into a volume that you can take and hold and study. And I think that really is a similar approach to how she's treating the folks of Daufuskie Island and really sort of collaborating with them, earning their trust to make these portraits of a life and a way of life with them.